2,000 years ago, Jesus stood before bodies broken by disease and spoke a single Aramaic word, not a prayer, not a plea, but a precise instruction that dissolved illness from its deepest root outward. This was never institutionalized, as the Church later taught it. It was a repeatable understanding of the inner architecture of suffering, documented in detail by his closest disciples, and quietly erased over centuries. There is one word at the center of every healing Jesus ever performed. A word that does not simply mean be healed, but carries within its ancient structure an entire teaching about where illness truly begins. That word is asuta. Tonight, you will learn exactly what it means, why it was hidden, and why modern science is only now beginning to confirm what Jesus already knew. When Jesus healed, he healed in Aramaic. This is not a small theological detail. It is the single most overlooked piece of context in 2,000 years of institutional teaching. Aramaic was not simply the language Jesus happened to speak. It was a language where a single word could hold physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual meaning simultaneously, where sound and intention were understood to interact directly with the body and the world in ways that flattened modern translations completely failed to capture. What we read today in most English Bibles is only the outer shell of a much deeper teaching. Layered Aramaic wisdom was compressed into single-dimension theological statements, a diagnosis reduced to a doctrine, a living instruction for interior healing, reduced to a story about someone else's miracle happening far away in the past to someone else. But the original Aramaic reveals something entirely different, something meant to be lived, not hust, read. In Aramaic, healing and wholeness were never treated as separate ideas. They were two expressions of the exact same understanding. The word asuta, pronounced a-su-tah, describes the state of restoration Jesus produced in everyone he encountered, and it does not simply mean the absence of disease. It means a return to original completeness. It means the reintegration of an inner fracture that existed months, years, sometimes decades, before the body ever produced a single visible symptom. This is why, when Jesus told those he healed, "Your faith has made you whole," this was never emotional encouragement offered to a vulnerable stranger. In its Aramaic resonance, it was closer to a clinical observation, a precise description of an interior event, a return to the unified state asuta, names one that produced measurable transformation in the body as its natural, immediate consequence. His Gnostic disciples preserved this understanding with striking precision. They recorded that Jesus saw illness not as an isolated biological accident, but as the body's final and loudest announcement of something that had been speaking quietly for a long time in the interior life of the person standing before him. In this teaching, the body never betrays us, it translates us. And asuta is what becomes possible the moment we finally learn to read that translation honestly, instead of silencing it with medication, distraction, or denial. Jesus never approached illness as an isolated biological event happening in isolation from the rest of a person's life, within the Aramaic framework he operated from. Every physical condition carried a traceable interior origin, and he consistently identified three specific inner states as the root of nearly every form of suffering he encountered. His Gnostic disciples preserved these three roots with remarkable precision, and what they documented aligns with striking accuracy to what modern psychoneuroimmunology has confirmed only recently, through decades of careful research into the relationship between the nervous system, emotional life, and the body's own capacity for repair. The first root the Aramaic tradition identified was darkness of inner knowing, living in complete unawareness of one's own deepest nature, functioning entirely from the surface layer of personality, history, and conditioned identity. Without any access to the luminous interior reality, Jesus consistently called the kingdom within. This state chronically activates the body's stress response, producing systemic inflammation, and accelerated cellular aging patterns researchers now associate with the majority of chronic illness diagnosed today. Jesus called it blindness. Modern science calls it allostatic overload, two vocabularies, separated by 20 centuries, describing the exact same condition. The second root was the interior state of sustained lack, the deep, low-frequency conviction that one is fundamentally incomplete, that wholeness is something external, something that must still be earned, achieved, or found somewhere outside of oneself. This is the direct negation of Asuta itself, a quiet denial of the original completeness Jesus insisted lives within every human being without exception. This particular state produces measurable dysregulation of the brain's reward circuitry, generating chronic anxiety, hormonal imbalance, and immune suppression that accumulates silently for years. Long before any of it becomes diagnosable in a clinical setting, the third root, and the one Jesus returned to with the greatest urgency throughout his ministry, was sustained resentment. The internal maintenance of past harm as though it were still a living, present reality. 1. The body is continually forced to defend itself against. Research from Dr. Candace Pert on the biochemistry of emotion demonstrated that sustained negative emotional states generate specific, measurable inflammatory compounds at the cellular level. Resentment has a chemistry. Chronic guilt has a chemistry. Unprocessed grief has a chemistry, quietly shaping the body from the inside out. Jesus perceived this not as a moral failure deserving judgment, but as a medical emergency deserving precise attention, and he treated it accordingly, with the calm precision of someone who understood exactly what that interior fire was doing to the body, carrying it day after day. Asuta, pronounced A-su-tah, in its fullest Aramaic meaning, becomes accessible the moment these three roots are finally named and seen clearly, rather than left to operate silently beneath the surface of a life. This naming is not a diagnosis meant to induce shame. It is the first honest step toward the very wholeness Jesus insisted was never lost. If these Gnostic teachings are awakening a desire for inner transformation within you, we prepared 2 guides on the sacred words where this journey begins. The link is pinned in the comments. The Gospel of John, chapter 5, records one of the most revealing healings in the entire ministry of J.E., a man who had been unable to walk for 38 years. Lying among crowds of suffering people beside the pool of Bethesda, all of them waiting for what they believed would be a miraculous intervention arriving from somewhere outside themselves. Jesus walked directly to this one man, bypassing everyone else gathered there, and began with a question most readers pass over without ever recognizing its radical depth. He asked, simply, "Do you want to be made well?" In Aramaic, this question carries a weight. No English translation fully captures the word Jesus used for well here is drawn from the very same root as Asuta, and what the question truly asks is not whether the man desires an absence of symptoms, it asks whether he is willing to undergo the interior reorientation genuine Asuta requires. It asks whether he is prepared to return to a state of original wholeness, a return that would necessarily involve releasing the identity, the emotional structures, and the deeply grooved patterns of experience that 38 years of illness had slowly built around him, layer by layer, year after year. Healing, in the Aramaic understanding Jesus operated from, was never simply a physical event. It was an interior decision of profound magnitude, and not everyone standing before him that day was actually ready to make it. This is worth sitting with, because it reframes suffering entirely. Illness can become familiar. It can become an identity, a routine, even a strange kind of shelter from the demands of a fully lived life. Jesus understood this, and he asked the question anyway, with complete honesty rather than false comfort. After restoring the man's ability to walk, Jesus made a statement institutional Christianity has consistently interpreted as a moral warning, but which in its original Aramaic context reads as a precise clinical instruction. He said, "See, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest something worse come upon you." The Aramaic word translated here as sin carries the root meaning of missing the mark of living in a state of disconnection from one's own deepest nature, operating from the 3 interior roots already named: darkness of inner knowing, sustained lack, and unresolved resentment, the very states that generate disease in the body as their natural biological consequence. Jesus was not threatening this man. He was diagnosing him with complete transparency and genuine care. He was saying, in effect, your body was expressing what your interior had been generating. The symptom has now been dissolved, but if the interior pattern itself remains unchanged, the body will speak again, and it may speak more loudly than before. That is the full teaching Asuta, pronounced A-su-tah, -TAH carries within its ancient Aramaic structure. And that precision, that clarity, that refusal to separate body from spirit is exactly why this teaching was buried for so long. The most radical teaching Jesus ever gave about healing was not a technique, a formula, or a sacred ritual performed with the correct words in the correct order. It was a statement about location when he declared, as preserved in the Gospel of Luke, that the kingdom of God is within you. He was not offering a comforting metaphor to people who felt abandoned by the divine. He was identifying the precise source from which every genuine healing he performed had originated all along, not in himself, functioning as some external miracle worker operating beyond the reach of ordinary human beings, but in the interior reality of the person standing before him, a reality he had the extraordinary capacity to awaken, recognize, and activate through direct, honest encounter. His Gnostic disciples, who preserved the deepest layers of this teaching, understood this completely and recorded it with great care. They wrote that Jesus functioned not as a healer in the conventional sense most people imagine, but as an initiator, a master whose primary capacity was bringing another person into direct, experiential contact with their own innermost nature. This was the luminous interior dimension from which the state of Asuta flows naturally. The moment it is no longer blocked by the three roots of disconnection, sustained lack, and chronic resentment already named. Modern neuroscience has developed an imperfect but increasingly precise vocabulary for what this interior contact actually produces inside the physical body. When a human being shifts from chronic activation of the stress response into a parasympathetic state, what the Hartman Institute documents as cardiac coherence, the immune system is measurably restored, inflammatory markers decrease, cellular repair processes, long suppressed by sustained stress, become active again. Jesus called this entering the kingdom. Researchers call it vagal activation. Both are describing the exact same interior transition, separated by 20 centuries of vocabulary, but pointing at the identical biological reality. What Jesus revealed through the concept of Asuta is that the body was never the problem. The body is the messenger. Every symptom it produces carries the same underlying message, without exception, that something in the interior landscape of the person has become severe from its original source of wholeness, and it is asking, with increasing volume, the longer it goes unheard, to finally be reconnected. A physician who treats only the symptom without ever addressing the message beneath it will inevitably find that message returning, often in a new and unexpected form. Jesus understood this fully. The Aramaic word he used, asuta, pronounced adash, sudash, tah, understood this fully. And now, slowly, the laboratory is beginning to understand it as well. Asuta is not the miracle. It is the remembrance, the body finally returning to the wholeness it never actually lost, only forgot. If this teaching is stirring something in your heart and you wish to explore it further, we prepared two guides that explain the first sacred words, where the journey begins, their layers of meaning, and the transformation they carry. The link is pinned in the comments. The teachings Jesus transmitted through his Gnostic disciples were never meant to remain as intellectual understanding, admired from a comfortable distance. They were designed to be practiced, applied with genuine intention in the daily interior life of the person who received them. Because the Aramaic understanding of Asuta is not a passive state that simply descends upon someone from outside, it is an active recognition that must be awakened, cultivated, and sustained through deliberate interior work, day after day, until it becomes as natural as breathing. The first practice emerging directly from this teaching is what the Gnostic tradition calls the morning recognition, before the conditioning of daily life layers itself over the interior, before the noise of the world resumes its occupation of your attention. Sit in silence for 10 minutes and ask not what hurts or what symptom am I carrying, but who am I? Beneath this body, this emotion, this story. This is not imagination. It is the same act of interior reorientation Jesus initiated in every single person he restored. Researchers at the Hartman Institute have documented that this deliberate self-awareness activates the vagus nerve, restores cardiac coherence, and produces measurable improvement in immune function within minutes of sustained practice. Jesus called it lighting the inner lamp. Neuroscience calls it vagal activation. The process is identical. The second practice is the medicinal word. The Aramaic discipline of speaking asuta, pronounced a-su-tah, not as a request sent outward, but as a recognition spoken from the interior. For 5 minutes each day, speak it aloud with full contact with the reality behind it. You are not wishing for wholeness. You are naming the wholeness Jesus said already lives within every human being, waiting patiently to be remembered. The third practice is the release of resentment as an act of asuta itself, not a moral performance of forgiveness directed at another person, but an interior liberation from the biochemical prison sustained resentment quietly constructs around the body over time. Research consistently identifies genuine release of long-held resentment as among the most significant factors associated with recovery from serious illness. Before sleep each night, bring whatever you are still carrying into the light of your own interior nature. Observe it not from the wounded personality, but from the depth, Jesus said, is the true source of asuta in every human being. We are just scratching the surface of this ancient power. Get ready, because in our next video, I will reveal even deeper Aramaic codes that unlock spiritual authority you've never imagined. Make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on so you don't miss this unfolding revelation. What Jesus taught about healing was never lost. It was hidden deliberately, systematically, with full awareness of what its concealment would cost the people who needed it most across 2,000 years of unnecessary suffering. The Aramaic word asuta, pronounced a-su-tah, encodes within its ancient structure the complete teaching he transmitted that illness does not begin in the body, that the body speaks what the interior has been generating in silence for far longer than any symptom has been visible, and that the power to dissolve the root of physical suffering lives not in any external authority, ritual, or intervention standing alone, but in the luminous interior reality Jesus called the kingdom within. The three roots he identified: disconnection from one's own interior nature, sustained belief in fundamental lack, and the biochemical imprisonment of chronic resentment are not abstract spiritual categories reserved for mystics. They are measurable physiological states, producing specific inflammatory and immunosuppressive effects. Modern science is only now confirming with the same precision. Jesus described 2,000 years ago in a language most of the world has spent centuries trying to forget. Asuta is not a magical formula. It is a remembrance. It is the body returning to its state of original wholeness, the state in which every symptom becomes a message finally heard and answered, rather than suppressed and silenced. Tonight, before you sleep, place your attention on the center of your chest. Feel the warmth living there, not as imagination, but as the same interior reality Jesus pointed to every time he healed. Speak asuta, pronounced a-su-tah, not as a request directed outward, but as a recognition of what has always been present within you, waiting in perfect patience to be remembered. The disease began in disconnection. Asuta begins in the return. Just a quick reminder, the transformation guides for a fuller life are waiting for you, right there in the comments. Before you leave, if this teaching found you today and something in it shifted, WRITE, the word restoration in the comments below. Your testimony may encourage someone else who is quietly seeking healing and renewal. Thank you for sharing this moment of ancient wisdom with us. Until the next revelation, walk in peace, walk in freedom, and walk in the power of Be Open.